The crystalline spires of the Galactic Academy of Sciences sparkled in the light of 3 setting suns, their delicate architecture belying the institution's reputation as the most prestigious school in the known universe. Kira Solomon stood at the entrance, her dark curls floating slightly in the reduced gravity, trying to remember how to breathe. "Your atmospheric adaptation unit is functioning properly," Student Solomon chirped her orientation guide, a floating orb that pulsed with gentle blue light. "Your elevated respiratory rate indicates anxiety, not equipment malfunction." "Thanks. I needed that reminder that I'm terrified," Kira muttered, adjusting the strap of her regulation school bag. She'd spent months preparing for this moment, the first human to attend the academy, chosen for her exceptional xenobiology scores and adaptable personality. Right now, she didn't feel particularly exceptional or adaptable. The massive doors before her split apart like liquid mercury, revealing a grand atrium filled with beings of all shapes, sizes, and states of matter. A group of gaseous entities swirled in complex patterns near the ceiling, while crystalline beings similar to the building's architecture clinked past in formation. What appeared to be a sentient patch of darkness, wearing a student badge slouched against a wall, absorbed in what Kira assumed was the alien equivalent of a phone. "Welcome to Orientation Day," the guide orb announced, its voice carrying just far enough to draw the attention of nearby students. "Please proceed to the main hall for..." The orb never finished its sentence because Kira sneezed. The sound, sharp, sudden, and accompanied by a visible spray of moisture, caused immediate pandemonium. The gaseous beings condensed into tight spheres of panic. The crystalline students vibrated at frequencies that made Kira's teeth hurt, and the patch of darkness somehow became even darker. Biological projectile attack. Someone screamed in the universal translator. "The Deathworlder has weapons. It's just a sneeze." Kira called out, holding up her hands in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "It's an involuntary response, though." She stopped as she realized her rapid arm movement had caused a second wave of panic. A tall, elegant being composed of shifting iridescent scales slithered forward, its translator badge identifying it as Administrator Zrix. "Student Solomon," it said in tones that reminded Kira of wind chimes. "Perhaps we should review the basic safety protocols before proceeding with general orientation." "I'm so sorry," Kira began, but was interrupted by a sound from across the atrium. Laughter. Not human laughter, but rather a series of melodic trills coming from a student who appeared to be made of flowing liquid metal. The liquid metal student moved forward, its surface rippling with what Kira would later learn were expressions of amusement. "You all look ridiculous," it said, its form shifting to briefly mimic the panicked poses of various students. The human clearly stated it was an involuntary biological function. "Did none of you read the briefing materials?" "Thank you," Kira said gratefully. "I'm Kira Solomon, and you are." Designation: Flow Pattern Sunset over Liquid Methane Lakes, the student replied. "But you can call me Flo. Your species' need for shortened designations is noted in the cultural documents." Before Kira could respond, a small group of students cautiously approached, their curiosity apparently overcoming their initial fear. One of them, a being that looked like a collection of floating geometric shapes, moved closer. "Is it true the shapes arranged themselves into a rough approximation of a face, that humans regularly expose their teeth as a social gesture?" "You mean smiling?" "Yes, but..." "Fascinating and horrifying. Please demonstrate." Kira glanced at Administrator Zrix, who gave what might have been a nod, sending ripples through its scales. Slowly, carefully, Kira smiled. 3 students immediately went into protective stasis. The geometric shapes scattered in surprise before reassembling. Flo simply rippled in apparent delight. This, Flo declared, is going to be an interesting academic cycle. As Administrator Zrix began organizing emergency cultural sensitivity sessions and the medical staff revived the stasis-locked students, Kira realized she'd managed to cause an interstellar incident less than 5 minutes after arriving. She could almost hear the Academy's admission board questioning their decision to accept a human student. But then Flo extended a pseudopod in what Kira recognized as an attempt at a human handshake, and the geometric shapes student began bombarding her with questions about other human expressions, and the patch of darkness drifted closer to listen, and Kira felt something she hadn't expected: hope. Maybe, just maybe, being the first human at the Galactic Academy wouldn't be a complete disaster. Though she made a mental note to warn everyone before she had to explain yawning. Physical capability assessment is mandatory for all species, the hovering assessment drone announced, its metallic surface reflecting the purple light of the Academy's massive gymnasium. Please arrange yourselves by approximate mass. Kira found herself at the very bottom of the scale, standing next to a being composed entirely of spun sugar crystals. Flo, her liquid metal friend from orientation, had pulled nearby, refusing to take a humanoid shape out of protest for what they called arbitrary solid-state testing parameters. "This is unnecessary," Flo burbled. "Kira's species capabilities are well documented. They come from a high-gravity Deathworld. We should skip straight to the advanced assessments." The sugar crystal student chimed in anxiety. Deathworld. But she's so small. "Size isn't everything," Kira muttered, then immediately regretted it as her translator broadcast the idiom across the gym, causing several gaseous entities to condense in embarrassment. The assessment drone bobbed impatiently. First test: gravitational adaptation. Chamber will simulate standard gravity ranges. Please enter the testing area. Kira stepped into the marked circle, noting how the other students backed away. After the sneezing incident and an unfortunate yawning episode that had sent 3 empaths into therapy, they'd learned to give her space. The gravity shifted, increasing gradually. Around her, screens displayed the mounting pressure in various mathematical notations. At twice standard gravity, several students made noises of concern. At 3 times, the sugar crystal student actually crystallized further in shock. Subject shows no signs of distress, the drone noted, increasing to 4 times standard gravity. "This is nothing," Kira said, bouncing slightly on her toes. "Earth's about this heavy. Want to see something cool?" Before anyone could stop her, she jumped. Even in the increased gravity, her legs evolved for a planet that most species considered barely habitable, launched her a good meter into the air. She landed with practiced ease, grinning. The entire gymnasium went silent. Did the Deathworlder just demonstrate recreational movement in crushing gravity? Asked a floating collection of tentacles that had been taking notes. Technically, Flo said, their surface rippling with what Kira now recognized as suppressed amusement, she showed off. The drone's assessment protocols seemed to glitch momentarily before it moved to the next test. Endurance evaluation. All students will maintain continuous movement until energy depletion. What followed was 2 hours of Kira jogging in place, while her classmates gradually dropped out of the exercise. Her suite caused another minor panic until Flo explained the concept of thermal regulation through liquid expulsion, which somehow made it worse. Subject maintains steady energy output, the drone noted, sounding almost puzzled. No signs of immediate fatigue. I could do this all day, Kira said cheerfully, then had to explain that no, that wasn't a threat, just another human idiom. The final test involved strength assessment. When Kira easily lifted weights that the drone classified as moderate, the sugar crystal student finally worked up the courage to ask the question everyone had been thinking. If you're this strong in our gravity, what are you like on Earth? Oh, I'm actually pretty average back home, Kira explained, setting down the weights carefully. Maybe slightly below average. You should see our athletes. That casual comment sent ripples of unease through the assembled students. The drone's assessment protocols struggled to classify her performance, eventually settling on anomalous, but within safety parameters. As they left the gymnasium, Flo slid alongside Kira. You realize you've just confirmed every scary story they've ever heard about humans, right? I was just trying to be honest, Kira protested. Besides, they needed to know. What if there had been an emergency? Now they know I can help if something heavy needs moving, or if someone needs to be carried to safety. Flo's surface rippled with patterns that Kira had learned meant deep thought. You know, that's exactly the problem. Everything that makes your species terrifying. The strength, the endurance, the ability to survive what we'd consider extreme conditions, you see as tools to help others. Is that a bad thing? No, Flo responded, stretching upward to form a rough approximation of a humanoid shape. But it is ironic. The very adaptations that helped your species survive your Deathworld make you uniquely suited to protect life rather than threaten it. You just need to help the others see that. Before Kira could respond, the sugar crystal student approached, their crystalline structure vibrating with nervous energy. Excuse me, Kira. Some of us were wondering, in an emergency situation, exactly how many of us could you carry to safety at once? Kira smiled, remembering too late that showing teeth was still disconcerting to many species. But the sugar crystal student held their ground this time, only losing a few sparkles of sugar in surprise. Let's hope we never have to find out, Kira said diplomatically. But I promise, if there's ever trouble, I've got your back. All of your backs. Or equivalent support structures. As they headed to their next class, Kira noticed the other students' defensive formations had shifted slightly. They still maintained a careful distance, but now she was in the center of the group rather than at its edges. Protection, she realized, had become a two-way street. Flo, noticing the same thing, simply rippled in satisfaction. Sometimes the best way to overcome fear was to give it a practical application. And what better application for a Deathworlder's capabilities than keeping their more fragile classmates safe? The Grand Hall of the Galactic Academy shimmered with holographic displays representing hundreds of different cultures. Each student had been tasked with presenting their homeworld's most significant cultural traditions. Kira stood before her empty display space, wondering how to explain Halloween without causing a mass evacuation. You appear to be experiencing elevated stress levels, Flo observed, their liquid metal form reflecting the rainbow of holographic lights. More than usual, I mean. How do I explain to a bunch of species that already think humans are terrifying that we have a holiday where we dress up as scary things and demand treats from strangers? Kira sighed, running a hand through her floating curls. The reduced gravity still made her hair behave strangely. The geometric shaped student, who had since informed Kira their name translated roughly to theorem, floated closer. Perhaps start with something less intimidating. Right. Good idea. Kira activated her holographic display. Let's begin with New Year's celebrations. The image of fireworks exploding across Earth's night sky filled the space above them. Immediately, several atmospheric beings condensed in alarm. Your species celebrates the completion of a planetary rotation by detonating explosives in the atmosphere. Theorem's shapes rearranged into what Kira had learned was their equivalent of a concerned frown. "They're just for show," Kira hastily explained. "They're beautiful, see." She gestured to the cascading sparks of red and gold. "Beauty through controlled explosions," Flo mused. "Actually, that explains a lot about humans." Kira quickly switched the display to something she thought would be safer: traditional dancing. The hologram showed couples whirling across ballrooms, folk dancers linking arms in circles, and modern dancers moving to unheard beats. "Fascinating," exclaimed a crystalline student who had been hovering nearby. "Your species engages in synchronized movement rituals. Is this a courtship display?" "Sometimes," Kira admitted, "but mostly it's just for fun." "Fun," repeated the crystalline student, their facets gleaming with interest. "You risk physical contact with others of your species for fun. Would anyone like to try?" The words left Kira's mouth before she could stop them. To her surprise, Flo immediately reshaped themselves into a roughly humanoid form. "I have been studying human movement patterns. I believe I can adapt." What followed was possibly the first human liquid metal waltz in galactic history. Kira carefully guided Flo through the basic steps, aware that every other display had been abandoned as students gathered to watch. "This is actually quite elegant," Flo said as they completed a turn. "The mathematical patterns of movement are quite precise." Theorem, not to be outdone, arranged their geometric shapes into a vaguely humanoid configuration. "I request the next demonstration." Soon, Kira found herself teaching an impromptu dance class to a collection of beings who had never considered voluntary rhythmic movement as a form of expression. The sugar crystal student created beautiful trails of sparkles as they twirled. Even the patch of darkness from orientation day, who Kira had learned was named Void, participated, though their version of dancing looked more like controlled floating. Perhaps, Flo suggested during a break, "You should explain other human celebrations while everyone is already moving." They seem more receptive now. Taking the advice, Kira began describing various Earth holidays while leading her classmates through simple dance steps. She explained Christmas while teaching a line dance, described Diwali during a group circle dance, and even managed to cover Halloween during an impromptu conga line. "So you're saying," Theorem concluded, their shapes spinning gently, "that many human celebrations involve gathering together, sharing food, creating light in darkness, and moving in coordinated patterns." "Exactly," Kira beamed. "It's about community, about sharing joy and traditions with others." "Even the scary holiday, Halloween?" asked the sugar crystal student, who had lost enough crystals during dancing to look slightly fizzy. "Especially Halloween," Kira explained. "It's about facing fears together, turning them into something fun. Plus, candy. Your species deliberately induces fear responses to strengthen social bonds." Void drifted closer, genuinely curious. "And to share sweet treats," Kira added. "Everything's less scary when you're facing it with friends, and there's chocolate involved." Flo, who had been quietly observing, suddenly rippled with understanding. "That's why you're here, isn't it? You're turning something scary, being the only human among us, into something that brings people together." Kira hadn't thought of it that way, but as she looked around at her classmates, now trying to teach her their own traditional movements, she realized Flo was right. What had started as a potentially disastrous cultural presentation had turned into exactly what Earth celebrations were all about: bringing different people together and creating something new. Next time, Theorem suggested, their shapes arranging into what Kira now recognized as excitement. You must show us this trick or treat ritual, though perhaps with less emphasis on the trick part. Only if you all promise not to go into stasis when I show you a jack-o'-lantern. Kira laughed, then quickly added, "That's a human joke. The pumpkins aren't actually dangerous." As the cultural fair continued around them, Kira's display became less about presenting Earth's traditions and more about creating new ones. By the end of the day, the Academy had its first interspecies dance party, complete with holographic fireworks that only caused minimal panic. Administrator Zurix, watching from the sidelines, made a note in the official records. Human cultural integration proceeding successfully, albeit with unexpected applications of synchronized movement patterns. Recommends stocking Earth chocolate for future celebrations. Side note, research human tendency to turn all gatherings into dance opportunities. The Academy's xenobiology lab hummed with energy as students paired up for their final research projects. Kira found herself partnered with Prism, a crystalline student who, despite still occasionally vibrating in alarm at sudden human movements, had volunteered to work with her. I hypothesize, Prism chimed, their facets refracting light across their shared workstation, that human adaptability extends beyond physical characteristics. What do you mean? Kira asked, carefully adjusting their shared microscope. Your species survived a Deathworld not just through physical evolution, but through behavioral adaptation. You developed technology, social structures, and problem-solving abilities that compensated for your physical limitations. Flo, working at a nearby station with Theorem, rippled in agreement. Like how you use clothing to adapt to different environments instead of evolving specialized forms. Exactly. Prism's crystal sparkled with excitement. I propose we study human adaptive behaviors as our project focus. What followed was weeks of fascinating research. Prism documented how Kira instinctively found ways to use her Deathworld abilities to help others, using her strength to assist maintenance droids, her endurance to escort slower-moving species between classes, and her heat tolerance to handle tasks others found challenging. But here's what's really interesting, Prism explained during their presentation. The human tendency to form social bonds appears to be an adaptive trait itself. Instead of becoming more aggressive or defensive on our high-stress world, Student Sullivan has created a support network that benefits both her and those around her. The presentation was a success, earning them top marks and prompting the Academy to reconsider its classification of human social behaviors from potentially threatening to advantageously cooperative. The final day of the academic year arrived, bringing with it a ceremony unlike any in the Academy's history. The graduating class had insisted on incorporating elements from various cultures, including Earth traditions. As Kira adjusted her graduation robe, modified to account for various body types and states of matter, she reflected on how much had changed. The same students who had once fled from her smile now gathered close, sharing stories and making plans for the future. Administrator Zurix slithered onto the stage, scales shimmering with formal patterns. This year has taught us all an important lesson about preconceptions and adaptation. We expected our first human student to be a challenge to accommodate. Instead, she adapted to us while helping us adapt to her. Flo, their liquid metal form dressed in what they insisted was a proper Earth graduation cap. It kept melting, spoke next. There's an Earth saying, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." We feared humans because they survived conditions we found horrifying. But we learned that surviving difficult conditions doesn't make a species dangerous. it can make them uniquely suited to helping others survive too. Kira's own speech was brief but heartfelt. On Earth, we have a concept called paying it forward, helping others because someone once helped you. Every time one of you worked past your fear to befriend me, you made it easier for the next person to do the same. That's how positive change happens, one interaction at a time. The ceremony concluded with what the Academy now classified as traditional human celebration protocols, which meant dancing, shared treats, including carefully measured amounts of chocolate, and even some small, controlled fireworks that only sent 3 students into temporary stasis. As the celebration continued, Theorem voted next to Kira. The next academic cycle brings 4 new human students to various academy campuses. "Are you worried?" Kira asked. "No," Theorem's shapes arranged into a smile-like pattern. "We know now that coming from a Deathworld doesn't make someone dangerous. It just means they had to become stronger, more adaptable, and better at working together. Those are traits the galaxy needs more of, not less." Flo joined them, their surface reflecting the celebration lights. Besides, who better to help bridge the gap between humans and other species than those of us who learn to see past our fears? Kira looked around at her graduating class, beings of all forms, states, and origins celebrating together. They had started the year afraid of differences and ended it celebrating them. If that wasn't proof of universal adaptability, she didn't know what was. "You know what this means, though," she said with a grin that no longer sent anyone into panic. "Next year's cultural exchange fair is going to be incredible." And as her classmates laughed, each in their own unique way, Kira realized that sometimes the scariest things in life, like being the first of your kind, like facing prejudice and fear, like daring to be different, could become the most beautiful opportunities for growth and connection. The Academy had wanted to study human adaptation. Instead, they had all adapted together, creating something entirely new in the process. And really, isn't that what education was supposed to be about? End.